So throughout my middle school and high school years, I was often identified as the quiet person. But that doesn't necessarily mean I didn't have a lot to say. Just like the girl in that video, um, I often had a hard time getting my voice to be heard above the voices of the extroverts. So you can imagine my surprise when I felt called to youth ministry. After all, ministry of any kind is very people oriented. I would be expected to, form relationships and connections and, make my voice heard. So after I graduated high school, I started volunteering in my church's youth group. And that's when God started pulling me out of my little comfortable introverted bubble. And He started placing people and opportunities in my life that, challenged me to take that extra step, and he encouraged me to do that more and more. But that didn't always mean I felt ready to take on that challenge. I'm sure many of you can relate to my struggles, in one way or another. Maybe God has been placing a particular person on your life to minister to, but you've just been putting it off because you're scared and you don't know how they're going to react. Or maybe God has been calling you to trust Him with your finances, and He's been asking you to give a little bit more than you normally would be used to. Or maybe God's calling you to a particular ministry, like kids ministry, the prison ministry, homeless outreach, or leading a Bible study. But all you can think about is how you don't feel qualified to lead or even serve in those ministries. Or maybe God's just calling you to love someone in your workplace that's just a little bit harder to love. Trust me, I've been there. Being put on the spot or being given responsibilities to take that extra step that God's pushing you out of your comfort zone. I understand. It's hard. It's scary. And I know all too well that feeling you get in the pit of your stomach when God asks you to go the extra mile, to just step out of that comfort zone. But the truth is, God isn't calling us to live inside our comfort zones. Sure, living in your comfort zone, it's easier, it's safer. You don't offend anyone, you don't embarrass yourself. It's cozy in our comfort zones. But God is calling us to something deeper, something greater. So today I wanted to look at someone in the Bible who had the same problem of wanting to stay in his comfort zone. His name is Moses. Many of you may know the story of Moses. God used Moses in a mighty way to free the Israelites from bondage. But the story didn't start there, did it? God had a plan for Moses from the very beginning. He protected Moses from Pharaoh when he was going to kill him. And then Pharaoh's daughter found Moses and raised him as an Egyptian. But Moses' life took a wrong turn when he decided to murder an Egyptian to save a fellow Israelite. Then he was found out and he had to flee, and he started tending the flocks of Jethro. Later on, when a new king took the throne in Egypt, the treatment of the Israelites was only getting worse and worse, and God was ready to put His plan of deliverance into action. And God was going to call Moses to start and have a place in that plan. But the question is, was Moses ready for that call? Was he going to answer it? Let's look together at Exodus 3 and 4. It says, "Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert, and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At this Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the land of the Egyptians and bring them out of that land and into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." So I wanted to pause here for a second, because in these first verses, we see the famous story of the burning bush. And this is where God calls Moses to set the plan into action. And we see this in verse 10 when he says, "Go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to free my people." So as we continue along in these verses, we'll see this conversation between God and Moses. And we will begin to see Moses' apprehension towards God's plan. And he starts making these excuses. And we'll see this progression of his excuses. So let's continue with verse 11. But Moses said to God, "I will be with you." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you.' And they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. 'I am has sent me to you.'" God said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation." So in these verses, we see Moses' first response to God's calling on his life. And he asks a couple questions. The first one he asks is, "Who am I that you would send me to Pharaoh?" And by asking this, he's actually using an Old Testament term that expresses humility towards God in this plan that he called for him. So God answers by assuring him that he will be with him every step of the way and guiding him and helping him. The second question he asks was, what if they ask, "What is his name? What should I tell them?" Now, Moses was asking this because he was concerned about whether the Israelites would understand that phrase, "the God of your fathers." And the reason for this was because the Israelites had grown up in the Egyptian culture their whole life. And this culture was a culture that had many, many gods. And so Moses didn't want this phrase, or what he was telling the Israelites, to get lost in translation. So God answers by telling Moses to tell them that "I am has sent me to you." And this phrase actually means Yahweh, which is used in the earlier generations by the Israelites. So in the beginning, it does seem that Moses has had some valid concerns, but as we continue on with this conversation, let's see what he says next. In verses 16 through 22 of the chapter, God is explaining how to carry out the plan and the details of that. But let's pick up together in chapter 4, verse 1. Moses said, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you." Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was leprous like snow. "Now put it back into your cloak," he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first miraculous sign, they may believe the second. If they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground." So, in these verses, Moses is again so unsure that the Israelites will even believe anything he has to say. So the Lord responds by saying, "I will give you all the tools you need to convince the Israelites that it is, in fact, the Lord that is sending you." But this still isn't enough for Moses. And we see that in the next verse. Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and teach you what to say." So what's interesting about these verses is that Moses isn't saying that he has a speech problem or that he has a fear of public speaking. Rather, he's using something called exaggerated humility. And he's trying to express to God that he's incapable of doing this on his own. And God responds by saying, "Well, duh. That's why I'm going to help you. That's why I'm going to equip you and send you with everything that you need." That's my interpretation anyway. So it does seem that Moses is scared, and he's having a hard time accepting this plan that God has for his life. So in sort of a last-ditch effort, this is what Moses says. But Moses said, "O Lord, please send someone else to do it." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak. He is already on his way to meet you, and his heart will be glad when he sees you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take the staff in your hand so you can perform miraculous signs with it." So Moses was pretty bound and determined to stay inside his comfort zone, wasn't he? He was begging God, "Please send anyone else but me." And God, I would have to say, was pretty patient with him. And he assured Moses that "I will be with you, I will give you what you need, and I will send others to help you." God knew it would be easier for Moses to stay inside his comfort zone, but God wanted to use him for something greater, to be a part of his plan. It sure took a lot to convince Moses to step outside his comfort zone. But what about you? What exactly does living outside your comfort zone look like? Does it mean that you'll never get to be comfortable again? No, but it does mean that you have to listen to God's voice in your life. Maybe you're like Moses and you're scared and you don't feel qualified to do these things God has called you to do. Maybe you say something like this to God: "I don't have a Bible degree. How can I lead a Bible study?" Or, "Sally's really more of a people person than me. I'm sure she can reach Tommy better than I can." Or, "Lord, I'm just not financially sound right now. I don't think I can donate to that missions trip." Or, "Jesus, please don't ask me to pray for Jim. I just don't have the words to say, and he's probably going to think I'm weird if I ask to pray for him." Maybe you just simply say, "God, send someone else, anyone else." I would encourage you, please give those anxieties to God, because he promises to be with you every single step of the way, just like he promised Moses. And the biggest part of stepping out of your comfort zone is trusting God. You have to trust that he's going to be with you and that he's going to give you everything that you need. There's this quote that says, "God does not call the equipped, he equips the called." And that quote has always meant like a lot to me, and it had a really big impact on my life, because it explains that if God calls you to a mission, he's not going to leave you high and dry. He's going to give you every single thing that you need. So after you seek God's voice and you trust in him, that He'll give you everything you need. Then you need to start taking those action steps. But what are those action steps? Well, first of all, you need to pray that God will give you the strength and will guide you in each and every step along the way. And then you have to do it. Well, that's a little bit easier said than done, right? But those first steps to take in God's plan for your life, they don't have to be these huge monumental steps. They can just be little things. Like if God's asking you to minister to somebody in your life, simply just start a conversation with them. Say something nice to them. Do something nice for them. Encourage them. Those things will speak volumes, and they will be so much more willing to listen to what you have to say down the road. Or maybe God is calling you to start a campus ministry at your school. He doesn't expect you to have a fully planted ministry right away, but take the first step. Talk to your principal. As we begin to take these action steps, God will begin to, help you lay down those things, and things will start to fall into place. That doesn't mean that you won't encounter problems. That doesn't mean that you won't encounter resistance or struggles or get those anxiety feelings, but God does promise to be with you every step of the way. And something amazing happens when we do that. We see lives begin to change, chains broken, and you begin to see the impact of answering God's call. I know taking those action steps can be scary, but imagine with me what the world will look like if you started stepping outside of our comfort zones. Later in the narrative of Moses, we see the amazing impact that is made when Moses, steps out of his comfort zone and answers God's call. The Israelite nation is able to be set free from bondage, and God's glory is able to shine through, all because Moses finally said, "Okay, God, I will follow you." And that's powerful. Moses became a great leader, and that's because he found out that, as we begin to answer God's call, not only are others around us changed, but we're changed too. I've seen this to be true in my own life as I begin to, follow after God and take these opportunities that He's given me in internships and just whatever it might be. He's beginning to mold me to be more like Him. I just want you to imagine with me what it would be like if more and more of us start stepping out of our comfort zones. Imagine the mountains God could move if we just have faith in Him. We are able to see lives saved, hearts changed, and people are able to set free from addiction and sin. If God can take an introverted girl like me and take her into the world of full-time ministry, He can do it for you. He can take you out of your introverted bubble and use you for great and mighty things. So let's take that first step today.